What's your response to the story which broke yesterday and published in the Australian today, which shows how many Communist Party members have apparently infiltrated embassies belonging to the US, Britain and Australia? What's your response to that?
Well, there are staff who are, of course, locally engaged in a number of posts right around the world. Clearly, the government's position, as it's always been, is that we don't make comment on people's individual security clearances, and I'll be retaining that same position, Chris.
So does it mean that you know that they have membership of the Communist Party and they're okay to work in our embassy, or you didn't know that?
Oh, look, I'd refer you to DFAT's statement, and DFAT are obviously the engaging department. Marise Payne is the Minister for Foreign Affairs, and that sits within her portfolio. But our position is clear, and that is we don't make comments on people's national security clearances.
Okay, but you know that most Australians would expect that we should weed out Communist Party members who worked in our embassies.
Well, look, Chris, I read media reports, as every other Australian probably has over the last 24 hours, 48 hours. But once again, the government's position is very clear on matters of national security and, of course, clearance for embassy staff. Now, in general terms, local staff obviously do completely different roles to those who are sent there from Australia who work at the local post, whether they're head of mission or otherwise. Once again, I won't be making comment on people's individual security clearances.
Something that has cropped up late last week, which has the potential to be a little bit more dangerous, is this deal apparently between the Chinese and Papua New Guinea to locate some kind of fishing district or multi-purpose facility at the southern tip of PNG, which is about 200 kilometres from the northern tip of Australia. This is traditionally Papua New Guinea and Australian waters, right?
Well, my understanding is that that agreement was signed back in November. We've obviously made this a priority in terms of engaging with Papua New Guinea to get a very clear picture and an understanding of what that agreement might or might not mean. We already have an agreement in terms of the Torres Strait that's in place right now, the Torres Strait Treaty. We obviously expect that those treaties will be honoured by both parties, but we're very close with Papua New Guinea. They're one of our closest neighbours, in fact our closest neighbour. We continue to work very strongly and very closely with the Papua New Guinean government, and I'm sure that at a diplomatic level we'll get further answers on that issue soon.
We can't underestimate how dangerous it could be, because that fleet, that patriotic fishing fleet, has got into all sorts of trouble in other parts of the Pacific.
It's an area in the Torres Strait where Border Force are active. They're engaged up there on a regular basis. We're obviously looking closely at fish stock management throughout those treaty areas, as we do in other parts of the Pacific. We want to ensure that, of course, that the biomass is retained in an area where it continues to grow. It's not overfished. Once again, we'll continue to work with the Papua New Guinean government, who have been very close partners with Australia for many decades.
The fact that we give them $14 billion in aid, you'd think they may have run this bias before signing any agreement with China.
Well, we do provide significant support to Papua New Guinea, as we do throughout the Pacific. I mean, it's our backyard, Chris. I think we have a responsibility into the Pacific to do whatever we can. That's why, as per the PM and the Minister for Health's announcements around COVID vaccines into the future, that we're looking to provide further support on that vaccination program throughout the Pacific, because it's important to us as it's important to them.
Australian coal. We hear this afternoon that Beijing over the weekend has officially blacklisted our $14 billion coal that we export to China. Any thought that maybe this was a one-off is now dashed, and this is a real blow to the industry, right?
Well, I've read those media reports. I haven't seen anything that would be considered official, but I think you've got the numbers bang on. It's about $4 billion in thermal coal into the China market, around $10 billion in steelmaking coal, so metallurgical coal. But they're still not our biggest market for thermal coal. That remains Japan. We obviously send shipments into South Korea and a number of other places. Companies will make their own arrangements when it comes to contingency planning or what they do in terms of looking for market share in other places. But once again, the fundamentals for us, Chris, remain the same. We have a high quality product, a high calorific content, low ash, and in a lot of places, boilers which are used to burn coal to produce electricity are finely tuned to the coal supply. Not all coals are the same. In fact, they're substantially different in different places. So it's important that we continue to provide our coal and our resources into those markets. Australia will continue to maintain its reputation as a reliable supplier of energy and resources. And it's been even more important than before through the COVID-19 pandemic. We've kept the lights on around the world.
There are calls within the National Party and elsewhere for a game of snap with the Chinese. In other words, for instance, putting a levy on our iron ore to them and so that they would pay extra. You don't plan to have any kind of tit for tat with the Chinese, do you?
We'll continue to meet our World Trade Organisation obligations. We'll continue to meet our side of our agreements in terms of free trade agreements with all the nations we deal with, Chris. As you would expect, as all Australians would expect, we are out in the market playing by the rules and we'll continue to do that. And where those rules aren't being met by others, well, we'll consider our actions through the WTO. But the price of iron ore has escalated again over the weekend. The spot price is very much higher than it was some months ago for iron ore. The spot price for coal as well has increased, as has metallurgical coal. And as economies start to tick up, as they start to get going post-COVID-19, I expect we'll see a return to what was happening in the months before March of 2020.
Let's hope so. Just referring to this UN climate conference over the weekend, what's your response to the chief calling for us, Australia and the rest of the world, to classify this as a climate catastrophe and treating us rather coldly and giving, I guess, a stage to India and China at the same time?
Well, I mean, Australia is a sovereign nation. We make our own decisions. We set the policy for Australia and its people. Australia's people get a democratic right to elect the government that they choose. We took our policy to the 2019 election, as the opposition did. I mean, Labor was, resoundingly defeated. Their policies were very much the reason, in my view, that they weren't successful at the last election, along with a pile of taxes and other things they put forward which people didn't support. But once again, you can't have policies which are unplanned, with no way put forward as to how you will get there, what it will cost, how many jobs. And in a post-COVID environment, Chris, every job is sacred. Every single job is an essential service, and I'm looking to get more jobs, not less.
Yeah, that's reassuring. One last one. You've got a bone to pick with some of these big banks who want to discriminate against any kind of company that might dabble in fossil fuels and refuse them any loans or money or funding at all. Is it not technically discrimination?
I mean, these are law-abiding businesses. They're not doing anything unlawful or illegal. And to have this concept that, a bank will just elect not to provide finance, not based on what the return might be or the risk might be, or in fact what it is they're trying to do locally. I mean, you look at a port. If a port's overwhelmingly exporting metallurgical coal and yet they still can't get support from Australian finance, well, I think that's wrong. If you're out there and you do part of your work in the resources sector as a consultant and you can't get professional indemnity, I think that's wrong. As I said to the ABC this morning, I mean, if you couldn't get a loan for a car because you work at the ABC, well, I think that would be a problem for them. So once again, I've put a referral across to George Christensen's Committee on Trade and Investment. I think this is an important issue. Joint standing committees have a lot of power in terms of what they can do with witnesses, bringing them forward, asking questions, and I look forward to seeing the report in coming months.